Hi, I'm Jack Maher. I'm here to talk about value stream mapping. Specifically, we want to make sure that we are understanding and clear on when and where we create value and deliver it. We're going to talk about value stream maps, something you may have heard of before. It's an old school tool from Lean, but as you'll see today, we have some very significant updates to that. We're going to talk about the planning process that you would want to go through to prepare to create your value stream maps. We'll then talk about assembling the team to create them. We'll talk about what you'll want to do to get started. And then we'll talk through specifically on 2 days of the activities that you'll want to undertake to do the correct research and get to the results that will help you reach the outcomes that you're looking for. And then we'll talk about what you do later on after you're done with this. This is all based on one of my new books called Value Stream Mapping, The Secret to Successful Digital Transformation, that will be out later this year. One of the first questions that we want to ask ourselves is, why would we do value stream mapping? Number one, and most importantly, it lets us refocus on what our target is as an organization. Our organizations exist to create and deliver value to specific stakeholders. It becomes our core mission and frequently our defining values. Value stream maps also enable us to focus on measurable outcomes, whether those are tangible financial results or other ways that we quantify our return on investment. Value stream mapping also significantly improves our ability to have an environment of trust. Collaboration is no longer something that we want to have. It's absolutely necessary. And the trust that we can build through the transparency of what we do is based on respect and honesty about what we do and how we do it. Value stream maps also enable us a very clear path to reducing the amount of waste that exists in our organization. And most importantly, value stream mapping provides us with a sustainable path for continuous improvement and the ability to have an atmosphere of continuous experimentation that drives learning. The value stream maps of today, however, look somewhat different from what we've seen in the past. And one of the most interesting things about this new approach to this old tool is the ability to use technology to monitor our processes and the flow of value through our organization so that we can ensure that we are clear on what's happening and where we need to pay attention. The reality of the creation and the collection of the information is that it still is a very personal and mostly analog process. It's about speaking with people and reviewing the information together and working through it. As we see on the slides, most of the time we still use Post-it notes or other similar pieces of paper or approaches to walking through this so that we can rearrange, understand, clarify, and identify where there are gaps and insert them. One of the really nice things about where we are today is that there are some really nice tools that can help us to do this. Because one of the challenges in the past has been the ability to maintain this kind of work. Lucidchart, which I have no connection whatsoever other than being a fan, is a free tool that is used, in fact, to create the charts that you'll see in this presentation. It's available as a free tool. And of course, you can upgrade for support and additional features as well. This is what a value stream map might look like today. Those of you that are already familiar with them will see some pretty significant differences between this and what you may have seen in the past. For example, this tool and the way we should structure our organizations in a value stream map today includes more information around things like the ability to use chat ops as a way to monitor and communicate the entire process. We also see some additions here that were implied in the past but weren't always identified. Things like these feedback loops with percent complete and accurate. We can also identify what is the actual artifact that's being moved through our processes. And perhaps most importantly to this is the fact that we now can represent this, and we should represent this in our actions and our organizations as a full circuit, that we continue to provide this feedback loop at the whole and also between the individual components. But as I mentioned, there are also some really neat tools that are available to us to make this even more actionable than ever. This, for example, are a couple of screenshots from a new tool that's made by Tasktop, a Canadian organization that's predominantly focused on integrations and the flow of value through our organizations. And in this slide, you can see the representation within the tool of what at least a part of a value stream would look like, and the ability then to integrate this with other tools that we have in our organization so that we can not just monitor, but we can also measure what's happening and identify where we have opportunities without creating a whole new process. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to walk through the 5 stages of value stream mapping. What we should think about from a planning perspective, how we should assemble our team and perhaps who they should be inclusive of. We're going to walk through day 1 and then day 2. And this is a 2-day process for organizations, ideally, regardless of size. And we're also going to talk about sustainability going forward. As we look at our planning, I'm reminded of the 5 Ps, and maybe you've heard of them in the past as well. And it's really important to doing this successfully. Prior planning prevents poor performance. In this planning, we need to be very clear about what our expected outcomes are and how we're going to measure the results of doing that. When we consider the execution of our plan, we'll need to consider a number of things, including logistics. And sometimes we forget about that. Making sure that we have the right kinds of resources and that folks are clear about what the expectations are of them and what they'll need to do both during and after our exercise. And then how are we going to manage this process? When we think about the planning, there are a number of different ways that we can go. We may want to have an external facilitator join the group that is skilled in value stream mapping to help avoid some challenges we know that we'll reach. We also can think about whether we want to do this as a retreat where folks are sort of sequestered, or if we want it to be more like a conference and an open approach. There are pros and cons to both. One of the most important things is to ensure that we have the appropriate leadership and sponsorship from our executive leaders. And they need to be involved in this both authentically and as the role of a servant leader, meaning that the leaders are prepared to help reduce or eliminate obstacles in the process. The team should be as small as we can make it, so long as we have everybody that's necessary for the organization to be able to respond. And it will take some time and investment from those folks. We'll want to make sure that we also have all of the tools that folks will need to be able to do this, ensuring that they are very focused on the results and not trying to find the right information, the right tools, where they're going to eat or where they're even going to sleep. And that's why in many cases, a retreat style is ideal so that folks can be totally immersed in this process for those 2 days. There's likely to be a whole lot of information and documentation that we can use that will facilitate a quick start. Things like annual reports or documentation that we have from various quality systems. Also, what we have in the way of accounting records or HR. We can also look for and should have industry information about what we're doing. Gartner, Gallup, and Forrester are 3 main resources for this, but there are many other places such as trade organizations and other sources of information that we should accumulate prior to beginning this process. When we bring the team together, we also have to make sure that the team has the opportunity to form as a team. At the beginning, they'll need to go through the Tuckman model concepts of storming, forming, norming, and performing. And once they get ready as a team, then we'll really be ready to get started as the process. We'll want to have leadership in this, and we need senior leadership that have the ability to command resources and to set priorities in the organization. We'll also want to have folks that are at the grassroots level that very much understand what actually happens and how it works. We'll want to be crisp on the measurements that we're going to take. And no matter where we want to go with this, we need to start with where we are. And above all, communication is critical. We need to be transparent about what we're doing. We want to be sure that as we go out and work with our folks in the organizations, that we are transparent about what we're doing, that we represent a respectful curiosity, that we ask to understand, and that we are clear on the answers that are given. Now, as I mentioned, leadership is really important to us. And we'll need to have a blend of both formal leaders in the organization and also informal leaders. Those are the ways that we'll have both the necessary tools, skills, resources, capabilities, access, as well as those folks who can really get the answers that we need, that can get to the heart of the challenges and issues that the folks that we will be speaking with will know and respect and will be more likely to trust through this process. Measurements are critical to how we perform this and understanding what's important to us so that we can focus on the right things, whether it's key outcomes and or key performance indicators. We can also measure things like culture and how we're doing. There are a number of different tools that we can use. And on the slide, there are numerous ideas of what you might choose to be the kinds of measurements that you'll want to take through this process. You should also map out what your current state looks like and where you want to consider changes. In some cases, it may be appropriate and now possible to return to some of the things that we have done in the past that we were unable to do until recently because of scale. The ability to use digital tools to create personal relationships is a very strong reality. So we'll want to consider, ranging from, are there old things that we want to bring back now that we can? Or where are we headed organizationally? What's important to us and our stakeholders? Again, being focused on our core mission and our defining values. When we look at the communications, we know that to be a critical part of any project or initiative. Making sure that we are transparent and respectful and constructive in what we do, making sure that leadership truly understands what we're doing, and that the organization is kept in the loop, ideally in a very inclusive way. And organizational change management, something we haven't spent as much time in the past as we need to in the future, includes some very specific tools that we can use to ensure that our communications are appropriate as people go through these changes that are likely to result from our value stream maps. On the first day, we're just going to get started, but it's really important that we get off to a good start. Number one, we need to make sure we have everybody there, everybody engaged, and we minimize the distractions. The first thing that we'll do is we'll put together what we think is a straw model or what we think the value stream map is going to look like. And then most importantly, we need to get to where the work is being done. We need to go talk to those folks who are actually executing the work. When we're talking as a team, when we first get together, making sure that we're clear about what it is that we want to get. What are the tangible outcomes? What are the intangible things? Are there things that we cannot change? Are there things that we absolutely must change? And setting expectations around what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and what the outcomes should be are critical. One of the most important things is to make sure that the team actually works as a team. Taking off rank or losing that focus on what role someone plays should become a part of the way the team operates. The first time we go through, we'll probably stick to the Post-it notes approach. We'll want to make sure that we identify what's being done. Where is the work happening, or what is the team? We suggest that you identify these activities with a verb outcome, such as create requirements. We then can use a standard model of inputs that are then acted upon by people using a specific process and a various technology. whether that technology is as simple as pen and paper or much more complicated. And then what we expect there to be from a process time perspective. We'll add percent complete and accurate later on. When we get out to the Gemba, the first thing that we'll want to do on the first day is to follow that value stream. We'll probably start at the beginning of that. And where that begins, that will vary from organization to organization. In many cases, it starts when an order is received. But sometimes we start off with a new product, maybe from marketing or engineering. We'll want to walk through that whole process, and we'll want to make sure that we collect as much data as we possibly can about what's going on. Again, being very respectful to the folks that we're speaking with, ensuring that they understand that we are there to collect information. And a genuine curiosity and an air of humility is incredibly important to making this happen. As we go through this Gemba, it will be a very full day, and it will also be challenging to those folks because there is a lot of things that we want to look for. This is not just a walk through the plant tour, but rather we need to write down everything that we hear and listen intently to understand. There are a lot of things that we'll want to look for, and even consider the 5 S's from Lean. And then ultimately, we need to bring this information back to our team space, compare notes, see if we all saw the same things. More likely, we're going to find different perspectives on the same experiences. That'll be a very full day. Going to day 2 then, at the very beginning then, we're going to want to look into the data, and we're going to start to lay out the information that we've gathered through this process. We want to make sure that we understand as a team, and to those who are participating with us around, this is what we saw, consider various perspectives. And as we go through, we'll want to make sure that we understand, did we see typical? Did we see the worst case or the best case? And what does that look like? How often do we see those different things? We're also going to want to look for how work and value flows through the organization. We want to look for pulling work into a team versus pushing work to another team. And we'll find that mostly where we have places, the backlogs or Kanban boards. As we collect that information and begin to process it, we'll also be able to analyze that so that we can identify those areas in which we would want to place the most focus. Where do we have the biggest opportunities for improvement, especially those that will improve the flow of the process overall? There are some specific things that we'll look for through this process. We're going to look for 8 different kinds of waste that come to us from Lean. Frequently, we use the term downtime as an acronym to remember and understand those kinds of waste. We also want to be very careful about local optimization. That is, times when we have one part of the overall system that is continually improved until it begins to degrade the process or the system overall. It's a real challenge. And then we want to look for those kind of predictable behaviors. How can we help folks through this process? Because we understand how folks process change. We know what that looks like, both at the macro and the micro level. As I mentioned, the 8 different kinds of waste, they will represent in different ways in many cases, but they all come down to the same thing. They are all ways that we are expending resources that don't drive the value or the outcomes that we are looking for. It's also important to begin to understand, what are the real capabilities? What does our model look like for understanding how much work should be accomplished? This is not a simple slide. However, this looks at how we would consider, particularly if you're using an agile approach, maybe a scaled agile approach. In this case, we're using this to look at a 90-day window, 1 quarter at a time. And we're using tools like big room planning that will help teams understand the entire process. We're also using a standard agile approach, much like Scrum, although this is not pure Scrum. We consider other things as well. Ultimately, we know how many team members we have. We know that we generally have 8 hours in a day to work with. And so this enables us to set realistic expectations about what should happen. In this case, based on this data, we know that we have about 5.25 hours per day of productive time for folks. And we should consider that in how we allocate our activities, how we allocate our resources. The things that we do and what we feel to be important are easily identified by a budget. And this slide indicates how we can and should consider the way that we model the activities and the expectations for folks. We know that the core mission should be the bulk of what we focus on. However, if we are going to live to the standards that we aspire to in a generative organization, we know there are other things that we need to consider. There are administrative tasks that have to be accomplished. There are other things that take our time that are absolutely necessary, but do not add to the value that we deliver. Things like some of the training or the ability to build our HR systems and provide the right kinds of information. We also want to make sure that we give folks time and space to learn and to be able to run experiments that are driven towards how we can best deliver the value in our organization and the values that we aspire to. This is all based on a series of books that I have written and are being published. Standing on Shoulders, A Leader's Guide to Digital Transformation came out last year. The outline of this presentation is included as an appendix in that book. That book was geared towards senior leaders around resourcing and planning and strategy. In a couple of months, we'll release Standing on Shoulders, the Digital Transformation Workbook. It takes 14 worksheets to work through these concepts to apply them to your organization. Value stream mapping, the secret to successful digital transformation will also be out later this year. And there are 2 more books behind those. This is also available as a webinar, a workshop, and as facilitation. We now have time for questions, and I would very much like to connect with you on LinkedIn so we can have an ongoing conversation. Also, Standing on Shoulders, the Digital Transformation Workbook is now available for pre-order at the URL on the screen.